Many excited people there, but you know, the world's sexiest people are scientists doing innovation. That's what I've always believed. And so, you know, just to talk a little bit about this, has anyone got any food? So this is the humble apple. Something that Idris Elba was talking about is that you can't eat innovation, and that's completely true. I've never seen a cheese and innovation sandwich on the menu, but the truth is everything behind the food we eat is innovation. This is packed full of innovation. This apple was domesticated thousands of years ago in Central Asia. It was, we learned how to cultivate it. We learned how to graft it more recently. China, a few years ago, had problems with pollinators and learned means of basically human-based pollination for apples to keep that production going. This is a local apple, fortunately, but we have food systems that deliver apples from the other side of the globe to your kitchens and your fruit baskets, and with incredible innovation technology behind it. And so, you know, this is really the foundational element of what the food system is the innovations and the technologies that bring the food to your plates and nourish a global population. And so we're going to be talking about this innovation in respect to meeting up to the climate challenge and transforming our food systems. You know, and we've been working many years on this. I've been personally coming to COPs for over 10 years. We've had a huge program in the CGIAR working on climate change, agriculture, food security. And over the years, more and more as we do the research and we do the analysis about how do we nourish a population into the future, how do we maintain a food system functioning under the challenge of climate change, how do we ensure that our food system delivers the Paris goals of keeping temperature rise within 1.5 degrees, the more we look at it, the further away we are from the knowledge for being able to do it. The numbers don't add up. We have a huge challenge, and we really need to step up to be able to actually deliver this. And so today is not about the blah, blah, blah. For too many years, we've been talking about there's a problem. What we really want to do now, and in we started in the ClimateShot, we're launching the Global Action Agenda through this panel and discussion. What we want to do is show, well, what needs to happen now? How do we get in from the blah, blah, blah into action so I can see my son's face once again and look him in the eyes and say, no, we are doing something on this. And so many thanks for coming. We're going to have a fantastic panel here and discussion. I'm going to hand over to Rachel Lambert, who's going to give us some opening remarks from FCDO. Over to you, Rachel.
Thank you, Andy. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Clearly, the world is warming much more rapidly than we expected. The destruction and damage that comes with every additional fraction of a degree of warming falls disproportionately on the poor. And innovation in agriculture, whether it's new climate-resilient crop varieties, new approaches to pest threats, or harnessing digital for weather forecasts and market linkages, is really vital. We know that incremental agriculture innovation has huge potential to unlock growth and reduce global food prices. But current agriculture technologies only deliver at best around 40% of the climate change mitigation that we need if we're going to reach the Paris goal. We don't have all the solutions that we know that we need. And it's clear that we also need investments in science to develop new technologies, in addition to scaling those that we already have. So what actions do we need to take? Firstly, investment. Of the $700 billion public annual investment in agriculture, less than 10% is spent on agriculture innovation. We know from a recent study that we did as part of the campaign that governments and the private sector must commit to a doubling of their investments in agriculture research and innovation in developing and emerging economies. That's an additional $15 billion every year, which will make a huge difference to our goals. Secondly, we need to realign our research and innovation to deliver practical solutions that offer triple dividends for people, for nature, and for climate. And that's why in the UK we're supporting the ambitious reforms of the CGIAR the world's largest global agricultural innovation network, to focus their formidable innovation capacity on contributing to transformative impact at scale. And thirdly, we need to reach that scale, and the private sector has a crucial role to play in commercializing new technologies, developing new investment models, approaches to blended and outcome-based financing that can help bring down the cost of climate-smart technologies. So for me, this is my first time at a COP. And so I've been listening to those who've been involved, like you have, Andy, for many years of COPs, and to hear their perspectives. And what I'm hearing is that agriculture and food systems have really landed at this COP. Why do I say that? Because many skeptics might say, hasn't it all been about forests and nature? So it's three reasons, I think. Firstly, at the World Leaders Summit, an innovation breakthrough agenda was launched by world leaders on the 2nd of November. And significantly, one of these is on agriculture. This innovation breakthrough goal for agriculture brings together adaptation, mitigation, and resilience. And the breakthrough aims to make climate resilient, sustainable agriculture more attractive and widely adopted than unsustainable practices, bringing benefits for people, for nature, and for climate. It's about making climate-smart technologies the go-to choice for farmers worldwide and ensuring that they remain affordable and inclusive. Secondly, at the World Leaders Summit, 105 countries responsible for over 85% of the world's forests made a commitment to work together to halt and reverse deforestation and land degradation by 2030. And agriculture, as we know, is the biggest driver of forest loss and has to be part of the solution. And that's recognized in the FACT dialogue, that's the Forest Agriculture Trade Commodities Dialogue, which was launched on Nature Day. Agriculture innovation is an integral part of the FACT roadmap developed under the leadership of Brazil. Thirdly, the COP has brought a real focus on tackling methane emissions as one of the most effective actions we can take in the short term. And at a time when every fraction of a degree matters, this is really important. And actions in the food system are amongst the most cost-effective and technically feasible methane reduction measures. So today on Science and Innovation Day, we have a deeper dive into the Global Action Agenda, which was launched on Nature Day in a packed plenary session on sustainable agriculture and the just rural transition. And as Andy says, with a star-studded cast. Transformation of agriculture and food system is tightly bound into all of these agendas. And I think that agriculture at the COP has moved from being the source of the problem to being an integral part of the solutions. So it feels like the conversation is changing. Science and innovation in agriculture and the food system are now rightly at the heart of discussions here at the COP. And as an example, as we speak here, during this 1 hour, we have 4 superb events occurring in parallel, including US and China special envoys for climate change, who are discussing green and climate resilient agriculture. But as we're all hearing from young people, from our own children, from Andy's son, from my children, we need to accelerate actions and innovation. And that's what the Global Action Agenda is about. The culmination of the ClimateShot campaign over the last year or more, it represents a vision, a set of actions, and initial priority initiatives that we can all get behind. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks so much, Rachel, for that. And so we're going to hear now from Danush about, Danush is a fantastic person. I'm a little bit more informal. We're gonna get a bit more personal on this. Danush is a fantastic person. He's someone that is constantly telling me it's about the action, it's doing. And so he's actually creating his own initiative now that's called a Think and Do Tank. And so it's no longer a think tank, it's a doing, it's the action side. And so over to you, Danush. We're gonna tell us about this. Is that? That's not part of this. Over to you, Danush. So tell us about what is this Global Action Agenda and what have we learned over the last 10 years? How can we do this better?
Yeah, thanks, Andy, and thanks for the very kind introduction. I was actually worried if it's your son again, because he's asking some very tough questions, and I think we need to answer them today, and so that you can go back and face him and say it's not blah, blah, blah. So what is this ClimateShot? It's been a journey, actually. So I was actually thinking, I first met Rachel just before the lockdown, 1.5 years ago, and in London. And then the presidency was thinking about what are the priorities for COP26, and nature was a priority. Within nature, sustainable agriculture was a priority, and within agriculture, policy, the relationship with forests, and innovation was a priority. But since then, we've worked very intensely with her team over the last 1.5 years, and it's not been blah, blah, blah. It's just been about how can we get to that action. And this action agenda, you should all have one on your seats. If you don't, please ask us and we'll give them to you. It sort of captures how we can translate this momentum into action. So just to introduce this to you, I would like to request that we play a short video of 2 minutes that we've developed, which really succinctly captures all of this. Can we have the video, please?
We're facing nothing less than a climate crisis. Agriculture is one of the main driving forces behind our changing climate. Our global food systems, all the way from farm to fork, produce around 1/4 of all greenhouse gas emissions. With the world's population expected to reach nearly 10 billion by 2050, feeding a growing planet while limiting emissions and the damage we inflict on nature is an urgent challenge. The COVID-19 pandemic was a wake-up call to just how interconnected and fragile our global food systems are. We need more resilient, climate-smart agriculture to create a more prosperous future for people, nature, and climate. With our best efforts, the technology and farming methods we use today won't get us even halfway to meeting our climate goals. We have to radically rethink what agriculture can look like. If we speed up innovation in agriculture, we have a higher chance of delivering the climate-smart future we need. We need far more investment into innovation. We need creative, new partnerships between governments and the private sector. And we need better evidence of what works, where, and how. Enter ClimateShot, the agricultural innovation race to save the planet. This is a campaign to transform agricultural innovation for people, nature, and climate. The goal is to accelerate innovation in agriculture around the world. This will improve agricultural productivity and provide better livelihoods for farmers around the world. It will make farmers more resilient, especially women, youth, and marginalized groups that work in agriculture. It will reduce greenhouse gas emissions, increase biodiversity, improve soil health, and better conserve scarce water. We're calling on governments, funding and research organizations, business leaders, SMEs, impact investors, community groups, and youth leaders to ally with the ClimateShot campaign. And we're calling on you, climate champions, to share your stories of innovation in agriculture. Will you help us reach our climate shot? Explore climateshot.earth to find out more.
So that's the video. So why is this not blah, blah, blah? I'm coming back to Thomas every time because I think we need to convince him that this is not blah, blah, blah. So we've all seen very beautiful videos this COP and previous COP. So why is this different? And for me, it's really about that ending point where we talk about we're calling on you to become allies of this campaign, to shape this agenda and implement this agenda. And that's what this session is all about. So where have we reached? So as Rachel mentioned, we have 4 priority initiatives as part of this campaign to advance its implementation. One of that is my own organization, the CGIAR, the reform structure, which has a huge focus on achieving impact for climate and nature, and over $1 billion have been committed to the reform CGIAR. That's a big investment to address the investment gap that Rachel mentioned. Another effort that Lisa will be speaking about is the 100 Million Farmers platform. So this looks at how can we scale technologies and practices that work to 100 million farmers. So you'll hear more about it from Lisa, but really partnering with efforts to get action done. The other priority initiative is the Global Research Alliance for Greenhouse Gas Emissions, who work with 65 partner countries. And so there is a real opportunity to enhance the capacity of countries on research and innovation. And finally, and this is the 4th pillar, is really about impact investment. And you're going to hear from Amal more on that, and that's really about, that's already mobilized over $6 billion in impact investment funds, which is aligned with the objectives of this campaign. And I'm looking at Joe, and we know that the funding to climate finance to agriculture is very low. It's about 2%, if I'm correct. And we're trying to change that, working with IFAD, and we'll hear more about it from you. But most importantly, we are also working with farmer organizations, and we'll hear from Ishmael on how we're doing this. So essentially, the value added of this ClimateShot campaign and the umbrella is how are we bringing together the efforts of partners together to get action done. And at the moment, we have a little more than 160 organizations which have allied with this campaign. So that is quite significant. If these 160 organizations, that includes 20 countries and national research institutions and country governments who have committed to this. So can we all bring the public, private, and farmer stakeholders together to get action? That's what ClimateShot seeks to do. So how do we do this? So there are 4 key mechanisms. So one is really about coordination. So what, we could launch this here today and then we could disappear, but it's about how do we coordinate amongst these allies and these priority initiatives to support them in their implementation. And we want to see that coordination occur after the COP, and we're trying to do that through the coordination mechanisms that Rachel mentioned from the agriculture breakthrough, but also we have a great partnership with the Commission on Sustainable Agriculture Intensification, who have developed metrics to measure progress. So we can apply these metrics to see how much progress is being made after COP26. The second is really about collaboration. So how can we foster collaboration amongst these players? I mean, everyone's doing great work, but still we have a food system which is facing a crisis, and also a climate crisis. So how can we foster collaboration? So how can we make these partnerships, the matchmaking processes in place? So these are some of the issues that we are focusing on as part of the follow-up mechanism. And engagement. So we have COP26, and moving to COP27, how can we articulate what we have done so that in COP27, Thomas wouldn't have to ask, is this blah, blah, blah? He should be asking us, how much more action will you do? Because we'll have to do more. So that's what we're trying to shift. And finally, it's about mobilizing investment. And we have mobilized some investment, but really increasing this over the next year or so. So we will be taking forward this action agenda over the next year. And really now I'll hand back to you, Andy, so that you can open the floor to the people who are actually leading on the action. But I would just like to conclude by saying this is an action agenda. So let's focus on the action part and report back to Thomas.
Great. Thanks so much, Danush. So Danush, round of applause for Danush. Let me go for a wander here. So this is a dialogue, this is a conversation. There are very illustrious people up here on the stage, but you're also incredibly illustrious people in the audience here, and so we want to hear from you, so start thinking and get ready to challenge these people and what they're saying. Get ready to really put us uncomfortable, put us on the spot. How can we do this better? So we're going to introduce here the fishbowl kind of panel, and so I'll go along. We'll introduce everyone, and then we're going to dive into some of the topics. So we have Lisa Sweet here. So Lisa's joining from this is a wonderful job title that you have. The head of Future of Protein, COVID Response, and Food Health. It's quite a mix of topics. And so Lisa Sweet is that at the World Economic Forum. Multi-stakeholder platform, representing the kind of views of a multi-stakeholder platform. We have over here Amal Lee Amin, and so I know Amal Lee from rich history, from all sorts of different angles that you're coming at, but right now you're coming from the angle of Director of Climate Change at CDC, looking at the investment perspective in this. We have Joe Puri. So Joe Puri is coming from IFAD, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, and is the Associate Vice President for Strategy and Knowledge Department. Sounds like you're going to have some really critical, important things to say and help us make sure that this climate shot is successful. Welcome, Joe. And we have, last but very much not least, Ishmael Sunga. Ishmael is the Chief Executive Officer of the Southern African Confederation of Agricultural Unions. And so Ishmael is here to make sure that we stay true to the farmers and the need on the ground. And so you be ready to say, that's rubbish, right? Whenever anyone goes, starts talking about things that are just not useful for the real end users that we're working for here on this. So this is our wonderful fishbowl panel. The way we're going to do this is just an opening little pitch, and then hopefully all of you, and this is for Danush and this is for Rachel, like jump in with reactions. You know, what do you think of that? Is there something absolutely right? That I can double that. I'll see that and I'll raise you that. That's really important. Or have we got things wrong? And so challenge, feel free to challenge. So let's go with Joe first. Over to you, Joe. And so really the question for you is how do we increase investment in agricultural research and innovation to create more climate resilient, low emission technologies and practices? How do we get that investment really flowing?
Yeah. Thanks, Andy. Thank you, everyone, for having me here. So since Andy sort of set the bar for this session, which is to be informal, to be interactive, and inshallah a little bit provocative, I'm going to start with my own first, which is to say that a comms colleague actually just told me yesterday that her grandmother would say this almost every day. Money walks, but bullshit talks, right? So I think what is really important is to see that if we are really serious about research, and if we are really serious about changing the space of agriculture, we've got to put money into it. At the International Fund for Agricultural Development, there are a couple of things that we do. And again, this is not PR. This is essentially to show to you that we are putting our money where our mouth is, but I still think that there is a lot more that we can do. So first, we do put money into supporting, for 15% of our overall portfolio, impact assessments. And for those of you who may not know the dollar amount associated with a single impact evaluation or an impact assessment, it's approximately $400,000 to $500,000. So 15% of our overall portfolio is assessed through impact assessments, which means that we can say for every dollar that we invest, what is the additional investment that IFAD is making by setting up counterfactuals, right? So that's one. We also put money into innovation. So blockchain technologies to really understand as to how salinity is creeping into water so that farmers in Vietnam, and my colleague Ilaria is here, and she can tell you a lot more about it. We put in money into that so that we can understand as to how they can change their practices. But it's not sufficient. So I'm going to say two things. I think there's a responsibility on the side of donors, of international organizations, to really increase and change the norm within research and within understanding what works and what doesn't for agriculture as well as for adaptation. And unless we change that norm, and as Andy said, unless we make it sexy, this is not going to change. I'm also a woman. I love diamonds. Diamonds are useless. We still put money into them. Why can't we create a market for something that is really, really important and useful to us, which is the climate? So that's one. The second is, I think it's also a responsibility for agricultural research. I do want to see agricultural research that is timely, that is useful, that's relevant, and that can be really produced in real time. If you look at the Quarterly Journal of Economics, if you look at any evidence gap map that we've done, and we've produced quite a few for global evidence on what works, and if you overlay it with investments, where money is going, you actually find that most research goes into spaces that is not being funded by large international organizations or by bilaterals or by agencies. So clearly there's a mismatch. Research has to really stand up and take responsibility for being real-time, relevant, and useful. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks, Joe. That's wonderful. So any round of applause? Reactions? Any reactions to that? Ishmael?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
I just want to echo what Joe said towards the end, that there's mismatch. That mismatch takes various forms, one of which is mismatch around the technical focus of research versus maybe the socio-economic side of research. We need to bring a bit of balance so that both sides matter. Perhaps what is more important is to understand the socio-economic context within which research operates and the needs that come there. It's easy to do the gadgets, but it's so difficult and not interesting actually to do the other aspects. So if we could consciously realign and focus on those things that makes human beings behave the way they do, it's much more important than giving them a gadget, which is also important, but let's bring the balance.
Yeah, no, the psychology. We don't ever do enough psychology in this kind of work. You know, I think that's absolutely with you there, Ishmael. Other reactions? We can move on. So I mean, I thought there was some great phrases there. I've noted them down, so I'll start using them. Money talks, but motion walks. I like that. That's definitely something to use more in the future. I think also marketing. You know, ag innovation solutions are forever. We need to maybe use that diamond idea. There's a fascinating story. The history of diamonds and the marketing of why all women want diamonds is a fascinating one. The most successful marketing campaign probably in history. We need to do the same as well, I think, on this. So let's move on. Let's move back to you, Ishmael. Maybe move the microphone just a little bit further up so that we can so the sound's a little bit better. And over to you. So Ishmael, you're representing, I don't know how many thousands or hundreds of thousands of farmers across Eastern and Southern Africa. And so, you know, how do we make sure that this innovation, this research and innovation investments that we're going to make, that's going to come with this ClimateShot, how do we make sure that it is listening to farmers' needs, it's responding to the demands? What's been your experience of that? What's the best practice? How do we make sure that this happens?
Thank you very much. I think there's no one size fits all because the terrain there is differentiated massively. So we really need to understand the terrain so that we locate our research and innovation efforts in the proper context. And a lot of the contexts are not technological. They may be socio-economic, policy, institutional, or otherwise. So that comes into play, hence my remarks earlier on about mismatch and need for realignment to look at those things that matter. The second point really is, after context matters, and context is everything, is the situation faced by farmers is very complex. It's multifaceted, multidisciplinary in nature. So we really need to look at a more systems approach that takes into account all that multiplicity, as well as a bundled solution, so that we don't deal with one aspect. It is many aspects, so you have to have a bundled suite of options or solutions. I think bundling arrangements are important. The third point really is we need to co-create the agenda first, the agenda setting of what is it that needs to be researched on. Should not only come from the researchers, they should also come from those for which research is intended, which is also a sore point in its own right. So how do we make sure that the agenda is set together, co-created, and that also the research process itself is participatory, is involving, right up to the end, including its measurement. So the measurement of the results should not be in terms of academic publications, as an example. It should be about what did people say is beauty, as beauty is in the eye of the beholder, so to speak. So let's not see beauty from our own angle as researchers, but let's see beauty from those for which research is. So the emphasis also being on partnerships. You don't research for farmers. You don't do research to farmers. You actually do research with farmers, and we work together. Another point is really that there are large numbers involved here, and there are too many elements, moving parts. So we need to be very focused, very strategic, so that we have the best bang for the buck. Let's target areas where we can have the biggest outcomes, multiple outcomes, and also let's increase our ambitions, not small pilots, but go for the big bang, but focusing on those things like technology, like digital technology, as well as backbone infrastructure. The final point really is let's learn from the private sector, for heaven's sake. The private sector, take the example of the cell phone. If there were going to be pilots on how to establish cell phones, perhaps we should not be where we are now. They just went and did it. Why don't you go and did it? So, I mean, in my broken English. They did it, so we also can do it. Pilots might be part of the problem. So let's just go and do it, and let's fail along the way, and let's learn lessons. And the private sector could be a fountain of knowledge and experience on how to actually build scale in the design together with the market and move with the market. Over for the moment. Thank you.
Great, thanks Ishmael. So talking of like great marketing, so it sounds like let's just do it, right? I like that message. Okay, reactions, Lisa.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna pick up Ishmael on the word you said, co-create. And you made a beautiful comment a couple of weeks ago where you said, don't innovate for me, innovate with me. And I keep repeating that over and over again, and I think it may have been Chatham House rules, so I apologize for that. But I want to pick up on that point, particularly as it pertains to youth. And how do we think about the voice of youth and co-creating with youth? And how do we unleash mechanisms so that we can co-create with the youth more?
It's an interesting question, and I'm tempted to quote one of my big brothers, I call it a brother, Thiele, who says that, you know, making it sexy, the sexiness is in the money, it's in the profits. So if we can find ways of making entrepreneurial activities that brings more money in the pockets of the youth, that co-creation naturally happens. They see that this is an area of entrepreneurship, enterprise development, and with, again, just to take advantage of this, my hobby horse is that if we can make carbon farming net zero, bring money into the pocket of the youths, you'll see them in their thousands. Let's make it exciting for them. Over.
Great. Joe, something to add?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So thanks very much. So I'm going to agree with one part and I'm going to disagree with one. I like this idea of co-creation, Ishmael, but I think that we tend to be a little bit cavalier about how much effort that requires, just because the language that needs to be forged, the common language, and we don't, between the users or the folks that research may be relevant to and people who produce it is very, very different. You know, when the Santa Fe Institute of Complexity was set up in the United States, they wanted to bring together all of the Nobel Prizes in different disciplines together. And they found the first year and the second year was a complete disaster because all of these Nobel Prize winners had won Nobel Prizes in their own disciplines. But when they were coming together to really solve some of the biggest problems of the world, they couldn't find a common language. And I think we don't spend enough time trying to forge that common language of definitions, of incentive, of objectives, and what we need out of the work that we're doing. I think the other part of what you said was very intriguing, and I completely agree with you that we need to think about scale up. But again, I'm a big fan of evidence. I think, you know, we shouldn't think about scaling up as something, again, something that can be done in a very easy way. For every dollar that gets invested is hugely, hugely expensive and scarce. So I would really like to see good protocols for what should be scaled up and what shouldn't, and it should be based on really high quality evidence on the ground. And I'm not seeing that yet. Thanks.
Great, thanks. Amal, want to jump in on this?
Yes, I also want to come in on the point of co-creation, and I think, you know, as an impact investor, that's very much actually what we are doing. And in fact, very recently, we worked with one of our investees, existing investees, a Kenyan company that looking to provide insurance to smallholder farmers, sort of a pay at harvest, a very innovative approach, designed to really incentivize farmers to actually take the insurance, and also lots of other innovative elements. And you know, we now, and thanks to FCDO, our shareholder, we have some very concessional resource where we can actually start to do exactly this. We can co-create, we can co-innovate, we can support, you know, along the journey, working with investees that are then working directly with farmers. And, you know, and I think that's exactly what we need to be doing as impact investors. And, you know, I think some of these companies, some of these investments can be very small scale, but the impact can be huge. And I do think, I mean, going back to the point in terms of evidence on the ground, I actually believe we need to move away from thinking about scale in some respects, particularly when we think about the impact in terms of resiliency and adaptation, that we have to move away from focusing on finance as the metric, where we assume big is best, whereas actually some very innovative investments can be incredibly impactful. So I think we do need to, and we need to co-work together around the types of metrics that are fit for purpose, really, in this respect.
Great, thanks, Amal. So, I mean, it's creating an ecosystem. There's multiple needs there, and creating ecosystems of these innovative, smaller scale stuff, but also, I mean, we do need to get this investment flowing. I mean, I suffer regularly in the process of getting just pulling, there's all of these promises of investment and finance, but then the action bit is tough. Moving from there into the action is a tough one, and I think there's a lot of frustrated people out there that are dealing with this all day. So, I mean, let's keep with you, Amal. I mean, like, so in CDC, what's your perspective right now? How do we move this? What's fast forward? How do we get this investment flowing? And what successful business cases are going to work?
So we've been looking at, in particular, how to increase investment in adaptation resiliency across all sectors, but we know the agriculture sector is the particularly urgent one in Africa in particular, and well, I mean, we only invest in Africa and South Asia, and we know that both regions are very vulnerable, particularly agriculture and particularly smallholder farmers. So we have been really looking at how we can invest more in the types of business solutions and technologies that can enable the agriculture sector and farmers to adapt to climate impacts. But I mean, I just mentioned we now have some new resource which is going to allow us to really innovate and take on much more risk, work with companies that are much earlier stage than we normally would, more in the sort of venture capital type of investment, which is something fairly new for us. Which we think is essential because we're seeing a lot of, really, following the research and development, deployment, and then I think, as we often refer to, that valley of death, where a lot of, really innovative companies just can't attract the finance to then get to the stage where we would normally be able to invest to help grow. So we now have resource to overcome and work across that valley of death, which is extremely welcome. We have a pilot facility this year and hopefully another 200 million coming from FCDO for the next 5-year strategy to enable this. But we also know we can't do it alone. And so we, in fact, a year ago, we launched a new collaborative with other DFIs, but also other partners, including some multilateral development banks, to look at how to accelerate private investment in adaptation and resiliency. And we see that as essential as I think, as we've just heard, and particularly around this ClimateShot, we need to address barriers across the whole ecosystem and, to drive a more systemic change. And we need to do this, at urgency and, moving at pace, and then, getting to the stage at which we can get scale, which I think scale is likely to be a lot of replication of relatively good, successful business models. And, but we are at a very, quite an early stage, but hopefully, we're as a collaborative, and in fact, we put a statement out yesterday with some commitments for further work over the coming year around these areas of common metrics, which go beyond input and finance, to think about more outcome and impact related metrics, to look at how we can have a more common approach towards assessing physical climate risk, and then also how we can basically co-create investments or approach towards our investing in a way that we can start to get some measure of scale. And hopefully by COP27 we'll have a lot more to report on that.
Yeah, no, thanks. I mean, and just I think we can do a lot more with the name. The ClimateShot kind of name, I think, is really good. I mean, it harks back to the moonshot idea, and I think in those days it really works. I think it was John F. Kennedy that says, we're going to go to the moon not because it's not because it's easy, but precisely because it's hard. And, you know, fast forward 50 years, we're sending people recreationally to space now, you know, and surely we can fix this one. But to do that, I mean, I think it needs, it is hard, and we haven't done it because it is hard, and it needs us to think differently and do things differently. And so, you know, I think, you know, there's things that prevent often this investment from happening is because we're using our old kind of ideas of how to make investment flow, and it's not working when you're in a risky, complicated ag environment. So, any reactions to Amal? Oh, yes, excellent. Let's go for Ishmael first, and then Joe.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I'm differing or agreeing with the two previous speakers. The point for me is that there needs to be certain minimum conditions precedent for anything to take off. If you go into an area which is devoid of any semblance of backbone infrastructure, there's no road, there's no school, there's no power, and you want to create innovation there, you probably won't go that far. The putting together of that backbone infrastructure should actually be the focus of innovation. How do we sort out the ABCs first before we can then overlay the other? Because we are trying to overlay a lot of innovations, interesting things, on a non-existent platform. So if people have not yet achieved levels of dignity that guarantees human dignity and human rights, how on earth are we going to expect to see them adopting better seed varieties? So focus of research, in my view, and policy can play a role, and digital technology can play a role. So I think that scaling up can still happen, provided we look at the strategic areas that needs to be focused. Take an example, a silly one for that. You've had two choices to make. One, invest in fiber in the rural areas everywhere, or in roads. I would go for fiber because it will open up the thinking and the space for people to interact and begin to challenge the things. So I think we need to be, as innovators, we are not innovative enough to deal with things that will give us the scale that we want.
Yeah, totally agree. Joe.
Very quickly, I agree with you, Ishmael. I think we need to be thinking about leapfrogging, right? And not to be taking this in a linear way. I think I have two questions actually, Amal, really fascinating remarks. One is, you know, in the context, especially IFAD works in, which is the rural poor, our investment sizes are very small. We're typically looking at farmers essentially coming together and forming saving corporations and really combining themselves into cooperatives, et cetera. There to be thinking of risk, and we do. We have a private sector facility. We also have what's called the Adaptation for Smallholder Farmers program, which FCDO invests in as well. But the point is that to bring in the private sector there, ticket sizes are so small that transactionally it makes no sense for them typically to come in. And we're really struggling with this. So I'd really like to have a conversation to see as to, you know, whether this is a sweet spot that CDC and IFAD could examine, and hopefully others too. But the other part is then, there is another program that we have, which is the ASAP Plus, which is the Enhanced Adaptation for Smallholder Farmers, which is essentially providing grants and therefore taking on the ability to take on these risks, where we want to combine forces with the private sector and to innovate with new things and exactly the things that Ishmael talked about. So think about us in your collaborative. Thanks.
There we go. We're already getting deals done. Brilliant. This is exactly what we need.
We've actually already had a couple of conversations with some people in your team. And I'm looking at my colleague over there, Chiara, because I forget the name of the people that we spoke to, because we've already started those conversations, and we'd love you to join forces. But I think also just on that point, so we not specifically, particularly for climate adaptation, although it will be a part of this, but we have already created, CDC created I mean, we often either co-create or create ourselves what we refer to as platforms that can do those smaller ticket size. So we have one for high value crops that is really kind of getting up and running, and I think we've collaborated there. with some philanthropies as well. But I think we're very keen to look at, can we do something specifically around these small businesses? Because you're absolutely right. I mean, the company, you know, one company we invested in earlier this year, which is a very innovative company in India, using you know, artificial intelligence to provide much more sophisticated but also user-friendly adaptation resiliency services, climate risk services to farmers. It's a $10 million ticket size, which for us is, you know, really at the smaller end of where we would be. But is providing 4 million farmers in India with these services. And of course, how many, you know, people and, you know, what is the food security benefits of those 4 million farmers? But a lot of the other, you know, the opportunities we are seeing are actually much smaller as well. But we do have this new facility which we can do grant, actually, or, you know, convertible grant, repayable grant, which is a new product for us. So we're, you know, really excited. Yeah.
Great stuff, great stuff. So let's move on to Lisa. And so, Lisa, you're with the World Economic Forum. It's a multi-stakeholder platform, and that's very rich and needed, and we need to be doing that, but it's also difficult, right? You know, so how do we build consensus and bring people around the table and facilitate this kind of inclusive dialogue for food and climate stakeholders around the world?
Thanks, Andy, for the question. What I'll harp back on is we were just heading the UN Food Systems Summit Innovation Lever for Change from the World Economic Forum. So coming out of that process, what was really great is the ability for that innovation lever to bring a broader definition of innovation to the world of food systems. So we weren't thinking about innovation just in terms of technology, but we were thinking about innovation in terms of institutional innovation and how to bring local and traditional knowledge into the mix, and how to bring and innovate for new partnership models, and how to innovate for society. And I think in that same or a similar way, we're looking at this question of consensus around evidence. Evidence is science, but it's also much more than science. It's evidence for what partnership models work. It's evidence for what works in a particular region or entity. It's evidence for new theories of change. It's evidence that takes a lot of experimentation, and experimentation means action. And that's really what this 100 Million Farmers platform is striving for, is to create that experimentation for action, for implementation, and for innovation. The 100 Million Farmers platform is really striving to help the transition for 100 million farmers by 2030 to net zero nature positive practices and food systems. And I say help the transition, to start and catalyze that transition. How are we doing that? We're doing that by catalyzing action and collaboration that takes place at the country level, at the regional levels, recognizing the diversity in this bold and beautiful food systems that we have. Our theory of change recognizes that there's not one model and there's not one framework that will address all of this complexity. There is no silver bullet here. But we really need to bring the diversity of these voices together in inclusive dialogue, in inclusive co-creation, to really drive the change, to embrace that diversity, to have those hard conversations where not everybody sees eye to eye. And as Joe was mentioning earlier, really to spend the time, to invest that time creating that alignment, but that alignment that's really geared and oriented towards action.
Great, thanks, Lisa. Any reactions to that? I mean, these are the processes that we all struggle with one way or another. We've got Danush. Let's hear from Danush first, and then Ishmael.
Just a quick reaction, Lisa, and maybe building on something that Ishmael said earlier as well, which was it's not just evidence on what works and what those successes are, it's also evidence on what failed and why it failed, where it failed. And going back to Ishmael, I think one of the issues I think we have as researchers in research communities, we don't embrace failures enough, and we often want to, promote our successes, and we have lots of them, that's good, but we also have failures, and Andy, we've spoken about this, and we really need to create that environment where we can fail fast, fail forward, and that's a bit of the thinking around the ClimateShot campaign, where we are trying to foster these innovation ecosystems, end-to-end innovation ecosystems, which are really demand-driven, but it creates that ecosystem where you can try things out, experiment, as Lisa said. What works, we scale up. What doesn't work, we learn lessons from that so that others don't have to repeat the same mistakes. So I would just say, let's also embrace failures.
I completely agree with that. And maybe just a point on that and reflecting on Ishmael over at the end of the panel. Part of our process is inclusive of farmers and really co-designing with farmers. So when you're talking about these fail and fail fast experiences, it's really hard when you're talking about livelihoods. But it's much easier if you go into that hand in hand versus going in that on two sides of the table.
And every time Danush talks about that, he always looks at me and talks about me with failure. I've always wondered about that, but anyway, but I'm very open. I have had some fantastic failures and learned from them, and so I'm very proud of them. Ishmael, and then we'll hear from Joe, and then we're going to open up. Get ready, you guys.
Yeah, what caught my attention from Lisa's presentation is that science is not the only source of evidence. I think it's a powerful statement in my view. Quite often, when I speak on behalf of my constituency, I'm accused of not providing evidence that is required apart from my own observations and conversations with them. In the system that researchers and innovators come from, it doesn't count. But that is life. That is where things actually happen. The point is that if you make science the only source of your evidence, you probably are talking to yourself only. And you might be missing other pieces of evidence that may come from observations, that could come from casual observations, that are so fundamental, that might be a deal breaker. And I'm urging science and innovators to really be sober-minded about it. I'm not saying go outside the methodological research ethics and whatever norms, no. But there should be an element of that. I don't think when the private sector is doing the market research, I mean, of course they do their framing, but I don't think they go into the kind of methodological rigor. Sometimes gut also matters. And not only gut for the researchers, by the way, but gut for the farmers. So that's the first point. The second point really is about, quite often researchers, there's this fallacy in my view, that researchers think that facts speak for themselves. Sometimes they don't, actually. Facts needs a voice. And that voice does not need to be the researcher. The voice could be us when it talks to policy change. If you think that you are going to walk into government office and say, this is what the facts are saying, so let's change. If the world was like that, we would be in a better place, all of us. But give it to the right people who can communicate that and say, these are our pain points. And if they say, it says who? We can say, oh, there's this piece of research that we're actually involved in. So let's change our tact and our strategy of communicating the outcomes of what we do. As long as we buy into it, as long as we do it together, then we're in it together.
Here, here. Great. Joe.
Very well said, Ishmael. Yeah, very well said. I wanted to respond to Danush's comments and also Lisa's. I think I think in terms of a research agenda, I'd also add what works better. It's not just what works. We've got to know, because we have only so many resources or so many dollars, and we've got to really be sharp about where to spend it. So what works better? I think this is the clarion call, at least from me. I think the second part of that is also, how should we deliver? I mean, I work for an international agency where I also wear a hat as a part academic, and I know that most researchers will not think about how to deliver something. You might have what works, but how do you deliver that? And that's a big challenge. So for example, in Kenya, we know that yes, farmers are moving from maize to sorghum because that's what works better in drought-prone areas. But how do you get them to change their production practices requires experimentation. E-vouchers, give them input subsidies. Think about, well, what works better in getting that transition to occur? That's really key. And the third point is a failure. I'm going to talk about one of ours, just to open this up. But in Mozambique, and I was there 3 weeks ago, we are working with farmers out there looking at cassava value chains and red meat value chains. We found that a lot of work that IFAD was doing on building these value chains for cassava were working. We were increasing incomes and revenues by 20 or more than 20%. But guess what? We just failed on red meat. And a large part of our evidence collection is now focused on understanding why did that not work. And it's related to norms, it's related to the overall vertical integration of the red meat market. But knowing that so that we can do better in the next 10 years as we develop our programmatic initiatives there is really key. Yeah. Thanks.
Rachel.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on that point around what works. And I think over the course of the campaign, we commissioned a number of evidence reviews. And one of the points that came out from that was really a need for us to have better metrics to capture the outcomes and to focus much more on the outcomes we're trying to deliver. And I think what we're seeing is that kind of coming together around those triple dividends that agriculture has to deliver. And if we're going to try and deliver that, we need to be clear about how we measure that. So I think there's a piece of work for us to do to make sure that we've got stronger metrics and that we're consistent about measuring those outcomes, adaptation and mitigation and resilience, and capturing what that means for some of those nature indicators as well. And then I think that, Joe, your point about what works and what works better and what are the incentives within institutions to use those, to use better evidence, I think is a really key one. And I think can help us move away from what we sometimes see in agriculture, can be sometimes an unhelpful sort of either-or thinking around technology choices and innovation. I think we heard a really strong message on Saturday that we need all the tools in the technology box, and that choices of innovation and technology don't sit with us or with researchers. They sit at the local level with communities and with farmers who need to be making those choices. But we need to develop the evidence on that range of choices and options.
Brilliant. Okay, so we've heard let's get some questions from the audience. I'm mindful of time, and then we can go back to you, Ishmael. So let's hear from the audience. We've got, oh my God. Okay, we're going to have plenty of people here. So we're going to harvest lots of questions. So we've got to come up to these microphones. So let's go. I know this lady here put the hand up first. Form a line, and let's go through quickly some of these questions on either side. We'll go there. We'll harvest lots, and then over to you to respond on some of these. So let's start over here.
Hear me?
Yeah. Just say name and where you're from quickly, and then.
Ali Kappa. I'm a farmer based in England. I also represent fruit and veg growers in the UK.
Move a bit closer.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I think this has been great. It's been really interesting to come into this session, and I really applaud the ambition. But I think my challenge would be that the ambition isn't ambitious enough. Going back to your son and the blah, 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 there's an awful lot of talking going on in this place. It's a real talking. It's been quite a shock, actually. I'm a practical, sleeves rolled up. I would challenge, there's no muddy boots on the panel. Where is the farmer on this panel? Whilst there's been some excellent representation, really needs to be a farmer in the room. The bit that I really would challenge about in terms of the ambition is it's brilliant that we want to focus agricultural research and innovation investments to deliver demand-driven solutions. Well, of course we would, otherwise what would we be doing? To protect nature and limit climate change. Why only a third? Surely every penny that is going into agricultural innovation now, anywhere in the world, must limit climate change and must protect nature. 100%, not a third. Yeah. So my challenge is that you need to think about the metrics. I've been sitting here thinking, is it me? Am I being thick? What am I missing? Why would 2/3 of the investment not want to do that? Yeah. So I think it's really important that we up the ambition. I think I really would like to say, Ishmael, thank you very much for your comments on evidence isn't always science. I get very frustrated as a farmer. As farmers, we deal with the climate every day. Every day I'm dealing with the weather at home and what it's throwing at me. We understand the climate. We understand how it's changing. And whilst we're not here in the UK, we're not at the sharp end of it, it's changed a lot in 30 years. So the ambition's not big enough. It needs to be 100% not.
You're on the panel in 1 year's time when we come back. Let's go over here.
Hi, thanks very much. My name's Professor McGlade, Jackie McGlade. I used to be the unit chief scientist, so this kind of like was my grist. But I've gone into the real world now, and I have 2 experiences, and I really want to challenge the whole panel. So I started a startup to create new metrics for what we're talking about. The banks are a little bit behind, but they're catching up, regulators and so on, and they love it. Investors come in, money pours in, it's the metrics they want, wonderful. Okay, money coming in on this side. On this side, I live in Kenya, and I represent 400,000 small-scale farmers. I'm standing here literally in that way. And I cannot get a penny for them. Now, the crazy thing is, I'm also a researcher, and I know what you mean about writing papers and getting the evidence, but I can tell you, it is really hard to write papers and academic reports that tells me about the success that I am seeing on the ground. Like, who is writing about alley crops, regenerative farming, the day-on-day success? So I'm completely with you, Ishmael. I mean, I've come here representing all these farmers, and I don't know how to get that evidence into, let's say, the CDC, the FCDO, and other, because actually I don't have time, because we're trying to grow food, stop people starving, literally. We're talking about livelihoods of about $5 a month, so it's not, it's not a lot of money. And the other part of it is, the farmers can't do what they're doing without all my ladies growing vast amounts of indigenous trees to create the forest, which will keep the water in the soil to help the farmers grow. So what I'm looking for is financing for communities which are highly innovative that allow the farming to go on. And I don't see where it is. It's just too difficult to find in a way which is going to be commensurate with the scale that we could do. So I just leave that to you as a challenge.
Thanks. It's a noble one. We're going to go over here and keep the questions nice and the comments short, and we'll get as many as we can. So over the back here first.
Hi there. My name's Stuart. I'm a farmer from Canada with the National Farmers Union. And Canada has been a leader in adopting the types of climate-smart ag that's being discussed here, but it's had the result for us of consolidating land, reducing the number of farmers, reducing net farm incomes, and promoting technologies which have led to increases in the types of in inputs, the same inputs that are one of the primary contributors to agricultural emissions, make up about 1/3 of Canadian agricultural emissions. So looking at some of the sponsors for these climate-smart agricultural initiatives, they include some of the biggest agrochemical companies in the world. I guess I'm feeling like these are not good faith actors, and the types of solutions, they're the beneficiaries of these schemes, and they've enriched themselves at the expense of farmers and at the expense of the environment, and without substantially reducing emissions. So I guess I'm wondering, hearing about innovation here and further investments with some of the same key players, how is this going to be any different?
And that can't be the outcome that we're after. At the back here, move over here.
Thank you so much. My name is Jessie, and like Stuart, I'm part of the National Farmers Union in Canada. Together we represent our youth constituency. I guess just to build on what Stuart was talking about, with this ClimateShot initiative, I really don't see a difference in the way that our food system is already managed in terms of the corporate dollars that are being funneled in to ensure that fossil fuel corporations still have their hands in farmers' pockets. Won't farmers continue to be locked into the corporate food system that has really proven zero consideration for our human rights? How could human rights ever be meaningfully engaged when corporate profit is centered in the food system? La Via Campesina, which the National Farmers Union is a member of, actually had a human rights declaration passed in 2018. It's called the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and Other People Working in Rural Areas. And I would recommend taking a look at this because the new rights embedded in this and how the ClimateShot initiative is actually likely working against most of the rights that 200 million peasants and farmers put together to demand what we need to see in a transition to food sovereignty and to agroecology. So it's been really disheartening to be at all of these talks and to keep seeing the same corporate solutions being advocated for over and over again when agroecology is already feeding the world. Farmers are producing 70%. Small-scale peasant farmers are feeding 70% of the population on 30% of the arable land. How is that not being considered as a real solution with farmers and peasants at the head?
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Let's keep going. Down here.
Hi, my name is Niall, and I'm a mechanical engineering student at Edinburgh, and I'm also an entrepreneur automating seagrass restoration, so it's a potential food source. I've heard a lot of talk about enabling innovation, but not a lot about what actual innovation needs to take place. So as an engineer, I'm wondering, what do we need to fix? What needs to be better? What technical advances should we be focusing on right now?
Okay, great. Get into the practice. I think I like that. Down over here.
Ian Lumley. I'm from the National Trust for Ireland. I've loads of cousins in Ireland who are involved in farming, and I'm horrified because we're locking ourselves into a production system globally of continuing the Western beef and dairy diet in our developed countries, which there isn't room for, and extending that diet to developing countries. There's too much vague talk at these sort of food systems events that's not facing up to the reality. What we're hearing from big agribusiness are mitigation measures against global methane and nitrate fertilizer use that simply don't stand up to maths, don't stand up to science. We're hearing all this stuff about carbon soil sequestration, offsetting, introducing animal feeds that will somehow abate methane. All of those may achieve some marginal impact, but they simply do not address the scale of change that is needed in global food systems. The United Nations Environment Programme said 20 years ago, we need to move to a more plant-based diet. So why are we not getting that message more strongly communicated, that the Western beef and dairy diet is unsustainable and needs to be radically reduced? And the major companies that rank with the global fossil fuel companies in terms of being the biggest emitters need to be confronted on that. So we need a systemic dietary change, and that's the message I would invite all of you to address and to communicate, and to look hard at the propaganda, what is really greenwash that is coming from the agribusiness that is pretending to face up to. We had the US Secretary last week, Thomas Visnak, saying that the US is not going to confront its high levels of meat consumption, that somehow magically these were going to be addressed by other mitigation strategies, and we're getting the same in Europe. They simply don't stand up to science. And please look at the science and communicate that message.
Thank you. Okay. Trying to harvest as many comments, questions. We're running low on time over at the back there, but I want this participation is really important.
Chairman, I'm actually, as it happens, coincidentally also from Ireland. Jerry Boyle is my name. I'm just retired as Director of Ireland's Agriculture and Food Knowledge and Innovation Organisation, and I'm also President of European Network and Agricultural Research Organisations. And my question and brief comment concerns a concept which I think is really, really powerful in this debate, and that is the notion of the Agriculture Knowledge and Innovation System. And there hasn't been mention of this so far, but there has been mention by a number of the speakers that innovation requires a system. And my experience from working from some work in Africa and in Latin America is that the agricultural knowledge and innovation system is severely flawed in most of the countries that I have visited, and I would say including in my own country. And the fundamental problem is the lack of parity of esteem for the actors within the system. There is a hierarchy which is completely unacceptable in my view, where the researchers are at the apex, and I speak as a researcher myself formally, and then you have The farmers are somewhere down there, but quite lowly down in that hierarchy. But so are the extension workers, the field workers, who carry the messages of innovation and of research to the farmers. So are the educators. So my question is, how can we fix the ACUS? Thanks, John.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to have one last one. We're totally out of time here, and we're going to have one. You promised to be 15 seconds.
Promise. My name's Jacqueline Krikorian. I'm from the American University delegation. I just really want to urge you guys to rethink this innovation into a radical shift in a new food regime. Radical imagination is what we need, and I'm hoping that you four can go back to your respective teams and redesign this completely.
Thank you so much. Boy, that was challenging. Okay, but we are running out of time, and what I invite, I mean, we mingle in the room at the end of this, and let's discuss this stuff. But we're running low on time, and we're going to have closing remarks from FCDO, from Charlotte Watts. Charlotte's the Chief Scientific Advisor and Director for Research and Evidence, Foreign Commonwealth Office and Development Office here in the UK. I'm going to hear from Charlotte, and what I invite is all of the panelists when we're done to come down here, and we can talk this stuff through, because this is the reality of making multi-stakeholder platforms, and this is the call to arms that my son would be making, and that we need to be addressing. And so let's create that dialogue and have that down there. But over to you. Thank you very much, Charlotte.
Oh, sorry, take off the mask. It becomes like an extra part of the body and I forget to take it off. Wow, that was a brilliant conversation and an amazing amount of challenge. I've just dashed here from launching the Adaptation Research Alliance. And actually a whole lot of the issues that I'm hearing in the room here and that you're raising resonates with that initiative, where we're really trying to say, how do we do research in a different way that values local expertise, that brings experience to the table along with rigorous science? How do we focus our efforts and our priorities on the big issues of the day and the big challenges? And I completely agree with what the challenge, and really are interested in the challenge that we've had. Have we got it right? Actually, what are the radical shifts? What is the role of major R&D that might produce more productive, more resilient crop varieties? But actually, how do we ensure that that doesn't lock us into monopolies that mean that the most vulnerable aren't able to access optimal varieties? These are the kinds of issues that we need to grapple with. And I mean, just speaking personally, I've just now significantly reduced and changed my diet because I looked at the evidence and said there's no way I can continue consuming so much dairy, so much meat. I'm not saying these don't have a role. If I think about a poor person in a developing country who has real nutritional challenges, I think it's, we've got to be careful to say this is what your diet should have, when they're just even getting the basic combination of nutrients is critical to their development and to children's development. So these are really tricky issues, but just to say, I think this is what this alliance should be welcoming and embracing, and going, actually, how do we get the right people into this alliance and partnership to help us have those difficult problems? And what I've learned from working in development for many years, and actually since becoming chief scientist in DFID and now FCDO, is also, as I understand more about the work we do in agricultural innovation and other forms of innovation, is often there isn't a one-size-fits-all. And actually the real issue we need to get into is what are the kind of options, solutions, innovations that we need in different contexts, and how do we make that work? So I'm going completely off-piste and script. I now need to look and see if there's some things I meant to have said. Just to say, we have a decade of action. The urgency is there. We all recognize it. You're here because you recognize that urgency. You're here. We've got so many farmers, it's brilliant, who are actually on the ground knowing what this feels like and what are the challenges that we face. I've been really struck by some of the voices that we've heard on this panel that are challenging, and going, how do we work as a partnership? How do we actually work on an alliance to tackle big issues? And that includes to ensure that we put farmers and the needs of end users at the center. I'm hearing from here also is other research systems and financing systems work. As a funder, I want to ensure that the financing that we provide does really support the generation of solutions that can deliver impact at scale, but really deliver impact and benefit to particularly the most vulnerable, and doesn't, through our mechanisms, exclude critical voices, but brings them and welcomes them to the table. And I'm really interested, for example, in the 100 Million Farmers Initiative and some of the thinking and work that we're doing. I also just want to put and stress the importance of some of the major R&D investments, and so the work of CGIAR, because it is such an ambitious initiative that enables us to bring combined science capabilities across many geographies to help us really tackle some of the big fundamental challenges. So, for example, how do we grow more food without growing greenhouse gas emissions? And the work of the Global Research Alliance on Agriculture. We also do need the private sector at the table, both large and small. They are critical. And in partnership with the public sector, we need to think about how do we innovate, not only to generate new solutions and technologies, but also how do we bring down the risks and costs of reaching the poor? How do we support innovation and learn quickly, and also learn about what gives us scale and what actually fails and that we give up on? And I've seen in some of our own research investments, actually our biggest learning has been from our failures. And we don't talk about them enough, and particularly as a funder, we're somewhat vulnerable to that, because we clearly want to highlight the benefits and success we can achieve through, for example, development funding. But also the ways that we can think about how do we accelerate innovation is also how can we also invest in innovative financing that values the non-economic impacts on people, nature, and climate as we move forward on these agendas. We need to deliver on multiple agendas, and so we need to be able to value each of them. We also need governments to work in joined up ways. So, for example, in the UK, we've established the UK's Gilbert Initiative, which is trying to take a significant portfolio approach across the different government departments that are interested in this issue about food systems and food resilience, to ensure that we can be coordinated and create and work in partnership and use all the levers and different sources of financing and expertise that we have in a more joined up way. So we're in the foothills of a decade of delivery, and I do think the ClimateShot campaign is compelling. You talked about, it's something that people can identify. And I think we do need to bring that energy and ambition to the table. And I think we've got many people here who are, I hope, becoming part of the who and how we make that success. And are we being radical enough? Are we being ambitious enough? Are we setting ourselves the right challenge? I mean, we've already got over 150 government and non-state stakeholders and members, and it's an alliance that's growing, and I do hope that many of you will come and join and both support and challenge. That's what we need. The agricultural innovation breakthrough announced at the World Leaders Summit has also set us as a community a common challenge to urgently bring down the costs of sustainable, climate-smart and resilient technologies, and to not only make them widely available, but also to ensure that they can be widely used. And clearly we need innovation to think about how do you achieve impact at scale. And I've seen in some of our own research investments that actually we need more of a focus on that downstream. What are the kind of innovations that take a promising idea, a great new technology, and really ensure that it really can get out at scale? The global action agenda for innovation in agriculture, which we've been discussing as well, also gives us a structure to help channel our energies and to start delivering concrete real-world solutions and the how. And I do think we need to move forward with metrics to measure progress and to ensure that we can hold ourselves and the world accountable. Rachel mentioned it. it's interesting that there's more funding for metrics than implementation. That clearly is a concern, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be using metrics, learning from the ones that you've developed, that others have developed, but then saying, okay, what does that mean about the how and what we need to prioritize? And particularly in these forums where there are a lot of ambition, a lot of commitments, but ultimately we need to achieve impact. Those metrics, I think, are going to be very central for us. As part of this, the UK COP presidency will establish a global checkpoint mechanism to track progress across initiatives that support the agricultural breakthrough. So we're committed to trying to ensure that we have that accountability. And we also hope that we'll be able to lean on our partners, allies of ClimateShot, those who've been involved in AIM4C, the FACT Roadmap, and others here today to deliver on the challenge and bigger challenges that you're all asking us to focus on. So I look forward to working with you. I'm really up for making this more ambitious, and this is a vital journey that we want to partner with you to work on. And lastly, I just really want to thank Danush for all the work, as well as the other CGIAR team for supporting this event. Thank the fantastic set of panelists, and thank you all for a really invigorating and lively conversation. It's brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Thanks for coming, and mingle and discuss.